Hello and welcome to the Idaho Reports podcast. I'm Logan Finney. Joining me this week is Dustin Miller, Director of the Idaho Department of Lands. We're here to talk about forest management and fire risk on federal lands. Director, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Logan. Happy to be here.
So we're speaking today in the context of last week, Governor Little signed an executive order addressing our relationship with the feds when it comes to managing fire. This plays into a executive order that President Trump signed last month. Talk to me about the order that was signed last week and this working relationship and the changes that are happening.
Absolutely, Logan. We've got a situation on our hands here in Idaho where large portions of our national forests are at risk for insect and disease infestations and consequently wildfire. The Trump administration acted in early March with the president himself coming out with an executive order aimed at expediting treatments of areas of federal land. So some of that includes additional timber harvesting, but a lot of it has to do with restoration of those lands. What Governor Little's executive order that he signed in Coeur d'Alene last week does is really add to that. It's complementary to that. It's a signal to the Trump administration that we're serious about helping out here. We're living amongst the risks here in Idaho, and we've got the capabilities and the skill sets to be able to help the Forest Service in this endeavor and help them make a difference to improve the conditions of National Forest System lands and really increase the pace and scale of those restoration efforts. So we're excited to be a part of that, and I think it's something that most Idahoans, I think, can rally behind because we're really focused on making these lands more resistant and resilient to catastrophic fire, protecting natural resources, and protecting communities. I think we're all kind of tired of breathing smoke in July and August and into September here in Idaho. I think as we continue to expedite some of this work in partnership with the Forest Service, the hope is that we'll see less of that, right? You'll see more restoration work happening in the shoulder seasons, prescribed burning, for example, post timber harvest, and hopefully you can eliminate some of the fine fuels that way. In the shoulder seasons, we're always going to have fires, but this serves as a way to help try to increase the pace and scale and minimize the impact of wildfire during fire season.
How much of this is the typical changing of the guard that comes with a new administration in D.C.? I mean, we've got President Trump appointing all of his folks to run the agencies. We've got now an Idahoan who will be in charge of the Forest Service. How much of this is the typical changeover, and how much of this is an actual, we have an emergency situation on the ground when it comes to how fires are behaving and we need to do something about this?
Well, Logan, I think it's a little of both, right? You went from a Democratic administration to a Republican administration. This administration is serious about improving the conditions of these lands, job creation, what revenue from these lands can mean for the American people. I think that, when we talk about the situation on federal lands, we're talking about a crisis. And in fact, the last administration called this a wildfire crisis, and they implemented a wildfire crisis strategy. But the last administration didn't act like it was a crisis, even though they called it that. What the Trump administration is doing now, and with Chief Schultz's leadership, we're treating this like a crisis. And they came out of the starting blocks hot with ideas on how to expedite the treatments of federal lands to address this forest health crisis and this wildfire crisis in Idaho. So I think the president has assembled a lot of the right people to be methodical, but act quickly to come up with strategies, engaging states and other partners to get a lot more of this work done to improve the condition of our National Forest System lands.
Idaho's been somewhat of a leader in this area too. We've got our Good Neighbor Authority, we've got the Shared Stewardship Program. Can you talk about those two programs for folks who aren't familiar with them and their place in this?
Absolutely, Logan. The Good Neighbor Authority came to be through the 2015 Farm Bill, and language in the Farm Bill allowed the federal government to partner with states and leverage the states' abilities and strengths and contracting procedures as well to get more work done and to improve the pace and scale of Forest Service lands. In 2016, the legislature passed a concurrent resolution that directed the Department of Lands to engage with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to establish these relationships, establish these agreements, and start to staff up in a methodical way to get more of this work done on federal lands. What the G&A program does is twofold. One, we utilize our forestry expertise, so our foresters. We utilize our streamlined contracting procedures to help hire the NEPA contractors and the other contractors to do the work. And we're able to establish these timber sales and administer these timber sales from start to finish. And that's additional volume that the mills need here in Idaho. About 50 million board feet of timber volume was sold through the G&A program last year, and that's pretty significant. That's between 24 and 27% of the entire volume sold by the Forest Service statewide. That's huge. So if we're putting up nearly a quarter, maybe more than a quarter, of the timber sales for the Forest Service statewide through G&A, that's huge. But the one thing that is often left out of a lot of these conversations is the work going back onto the ground and the money going back onto the ground to restore these areas. So you're generating revenue from those federal timber sales. After our costs are covered, money is rolled forward to plan the next timber sale, but money is also rolled forward for the restoration work on the ground. Fish and wildlife habitat restoration, working very closely with our partners at Idaho Fish and Game. The road and trail work, the improvements there, culvert replacements, noxious weed abatements, those types of things. Prescribed burning, for example, I talked about that earlier. Mechanical thinning. The idea here is to make those lands more resistant and resilient to insect and disease infestations and certainly wildfire. And so that restoration piece is critical. That's something that everybody can rally behind. And through our G&A program, we're able to get a lot of that work done. To broaden that out a little bit more to shared stewardship, that's our cross-boundary work. So
Go ahead, yeah.
It's not only our work on federal lands, the federal lands is complementary to everything else. So our work on state endowment trust lands, which are managed for timber production on those timbered acres.
And a lot of that revenue goes towards schools.
Goes to public schools and other institutions per the Constitution. But a big focus of shared stewardship is working with private landowners as well. In that wild and urban interface where timberlands are meeting development and the built environment, those are critical places for us to do more work through shared stewardship, establishing those relationships, utilizing grant funds to hire contractors to get a lot of that work done, to make those areas within that wild and urban interface more resistant to catastrophic fire. If you take a look at what's happening around us, California and Oregon, the major wildfire disasters that they've had, the governor is working diligently to implement these programs to avoid those types of things here in Idaho. So we're excited about this partnership with the federal government.
There's the WUI, that wildland urban interface that's growing as the state is growing. Talk to me a little bit more about those shared stewardship, those partnerships with the local agencies when it comes to places where people are living, where you're suddenly dealing with structure fires, which is not what your Department of Lands firefighters are trained to deal with.
Right, absolutely, Logan. When it comes to the wild and urban interface, a lot of that ground is our primary responsibility for fire suppression. They're private acres, private timberland acres. If you look in North Idaho, you look at Kootenai County and the long corridor between Coeur d'Alene all the way up to Bonners Ferry. A lot of that ground is our primary protection, and it's expanding. You've got about 2 million people, I think north of 2 million people now in the state. You have an expanding wild and urban interface. You have more human-caused ignitions. We're chasing a lot more fire. And let alone, fire season is now on average about 32 days longer than it was 10 years ago. And so we're having more extreme fire behavior, longer seasons, more primary protection in these areas where humans are at risk. And so relying heavily on the local fire service organizations, the structure departments, our relationships with the Idaho Fire Chiefs Association, it's critical. And I think those relationships are only becoming stronger. For example, Chief Niemeyer here with Boise Fire. If it wasn't for the efforts of him and his crews on the Valley Fire here, protecting that built environment and the wild and urban interface, it would have been a much different story. We didn't lose any structures. And that was an all hands on deck, multi-agency response between Department of Lands, Forest Service, BLM, and Boise Fire. And of course, Boise Fire brought in other municipal resources. But those relationships before the fire and during the fire, and certainly after the fire, are critical. And so that's part of our focus moving forward, is really solidifying those relationships and building even new partnerships to be able to tackle this wildfire crisis in Idaho.
On the other side of the equation, there is the federal part. We just spoke about your relationship with the locals. When it comes to the federal government in fire management, you spoke very highly of the Trump administration's footing in dealing with this issue, but there's also a lot of uncertainty at the federal level right now. Are you concerned that layoffs and other management uncertainty at the federal level will impact those relationships as we're trying to ramp up collaboration with the Forest Service at the same time?
Well, certainly the Trump administration is looking to right-size the federal government, right? I don't know what that looks like, but they're working diligently to figure that part out. Certainly there is a concern about the reduction in force on the federal side. You've got employees at the Forest Service and the BLM that are taking the various early retirement programs that are being offered. And a lot of those folks, while they may not be primary fire, they're secondary fire. They've got their normal day jobs, but they also participate in fire, whether fire line leadership, participating on teams, supporting our boots on the ground. And so there is a concern about how many of those people may be qualified in those areas that will not be working anymore, right?
Because this is someone who in a typical day would be working in an office building at a desk job, but when you need bodies on the ground, they're qualified and able to go out and serve on the fire.
Yeah, whatever their role may be, they are playing a role. Many of them are playing a role in fire, and so we call that at IDL our militia crew. I think the feds do as well. Where our militia folks, we rely heavily on them. They're foresters, range professionals, folks that work in the various offices, even right here in the Boise office. And when the fire bell rings and we say, hey, I need all hands, anybody who's available for fire, and it's not difficult to get our people involved in fire. They jump in and they help out, which is what I really love about IDL. But that militia crew, both on the federal and the state side, are critical. They play critical roles during fire season, and so I guess that would be a concern, depending on which positions are being eliminated, or which ones are being offered that early retirement. So we'll see how it all shakes out, I guess.
In the realm of things that you have direct say over at IDL, how's your staffing looking at that point? You guys have done a lot of work with the legislature in the last couple of years, working on targeting pay increasements, compensation. What's staffing look like at the department, and have those investments been successful?
Yeah, we've been really focused on this piece, Logan. Over the last several years, we've really been focused on modernizing our operations, and with that comes with additional ways to improve compensation for our firefighters and our fire line leadership. So we have increased pay. We have provided hazard pay now for our wildland firefighters and folks that do go out to the fire line, right? And so that hazard pay component is now largely consistent with what the feds are paying. So that kind of levels the playing field a little bit there. Bonuses. The last two budget cycles now, the governor has tucked into IDL's budget $1 million each year for us to pay bonuses to our wildland firefighters, setting up a structure and a sliding scale for how we do that. But this was the second year, starting here in July with FY26. That'll be our second year that we'll be able to offer those bonuses to our wildland firefighters and support staff. So that's huge, right? And we've done a number of different things there to work on compensation. Really trying to build our capacity in fire line leadership and filling critical positions and creating critical positions that we need given the demand and the kind of fire load we're seeing now. And so the legislature has been helpful and supportive in large part to our modernization efforts. We still lag behind the feds, but we're working that way. The governor has laid out his recommendations. He established a wildfire roundtable in 2023, and you fast forward almost a year later in the summer of 2024. The governor unveiled those recommendations, and that helps us continue down this path of modernization of our efforts and our partnership work. And we also do have a new draft strategic plan for our wildland and fire program that helps guide our efforts over the next 10 and 20 years. And it helps us stay on this track of modernizing and making sure that we've got the resources, the training, the personnel, and the capabilities to deal with this expanding wildfire issue here in Idaho. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic.
Something that didn't get funded or didn't receive the funding in the way that the governor had recommended is the fire suppression fund, the actual funding that you guys use to pay for the firefighting. You guys do have the authority to use what are called deficiency warrants. So spending the money, we're not going to stop fighting the fire just because the account is empty. You have to do that work and then come back to the legislature in the following year. Briefly explain what the governor was asking for and what the status quo looks like with that not being taken up by the legislature.
Yeah. So historically, both Governor Otter and Governor Little now have been focused on pre-funding the fire suppression account. You're right, we do have the ability to utilize deficiency warrant spending authority, meaning if you've got nothing in the suppression account, you can put it all on a credit card, and let's hope the money is there come January, February, when I need to go back and ask the legislature to pay the bills. So we're grateful to have that authority. But I think what the governor really wants to stay focused on is pre-funding that suppression account. If we have the money to do it, we know fire seasons are going to be at least $50–60 million moving forward.
And they're not going away.
A couple years ago, and they're not going away. A couple years ago, we had close to an $80 million fire season. And so if the money's available, it's been good practice by the governor to pre-fund that suppression account so we have the money. The governor had asked for $100 million for FY26. 60 of that was a supplemental for FY25 to replenish what we spent, and then $40 million ongoing. So about $100 million this budget cycle, with a lot of different competing interests, and tax relief being one of them. And tax relief is huge. That's very impactful for Idahoans, and certainly I support that. But there wasn't enough money to fulfill that request for the suppression account to get all the way there. So $40 million one time was provided. We're grateful for that. That adds to about maybe $12 million, I think, is what we currently have in the suppression account. We're still reconciling costs from the last fire season. But let's say we have about $52 million in there. Hopefully that gets us by, but if it doesn't, I'm going to have to utilize the deficiency warrant spending authority, and then hoping the legislature has some money for me when if I have to utilize the credit card, right? We call it the credit card. So if I have to utilize that, I'm hoping that the money will be available to pay those bills, post-fire season. So, but again, I'm grateful for what the legislature did fund.
Well, we'll have to have you back at the end of the fire season to catch up with you.
Absolutely.
Director Dustin Miller with the Idaho Department of Lands, thanks for making time for us.
Great. Thanks, Logan.
Support for Idaho Public Television comes from the School of Public Service at Boise State University, providing objective and impactful research for Idaho and beyond, and academic programs with hands-on learning that equip students to be effective public service leaders.
Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.